We were like, oh, we should like start the segment off with something funny, and then Maya perplexity funny things.
That was the entire search.
I'm not a funny person. I'm just like funny to watch.
You're funny unironically.
No,
yeah.
I actually think you are funny.
Oh, really? That's nice.
It's been a while since we've recorded. We've been traveling, so we did some pre-recorded interviews, but we were in Irvine, and then I was in Salt Lake City.
I was in some Italian country. Can't name exactly where.
Yeah. But Irvine was fun. We did a little business trip. We drank with Priya's parents. They told us we need to get husbands.
They kept asking me to find you guys something.
I feel like they weren't even pressuring. They were just like pointing out the fact that
we don't have
like even
a prospect.
An inkling
of
a prospect.
Well, you had one.
Well, let's not say we don't have a prospect. Let's just say we don't have boyfriends.
Oh, so you want to publicly admit that you have prospects.
Okay, I think we should just do the intro to the podcast.
Welcome back to Get the Check. I'm Maya.
I'm Annika.
I'm Priya.
And today we have some really fun news stories. We're going to be covering the recent tariffs, MCP, which is Model Context Protocol, the new language for LLMs and tools to interact with each other, and finally Base Power, which is a energy startup that focuses on creating batteries for consumers. Yeah? Cool.
Yeah.
So to start off with your favorite story, Annika, tariffs.
Take it away, Annika.
Yeah, take it away.
Okay, well, I feel like everyone probably knows the TLDR by now, which is that on April 2nd, Trump basically coins it Liberation Day, and he's on the Rose Garden of the White House, and his like people are handing out these pamphlets that basically have all these new, what he calls reciprocal tariffs on a variety of countries, from allies to adversaries, to an island that just has penguins in the middle of nowhere. So really ran the gamut. And because he called them reciprocal tariffs, people thought that they were going to basically match any tariffs other countries have on us. But they come out with basically an entirely different equation.
They weren't really clear what this equation was at first and then came out with it later, which I thought was pretty funny.
Of course, Twitter figures it out in 2 seconds.
Yeah. And so what it is basically the trade deficit over the total amount of imports.
Yeah, and a deficit just means that we're importing more than we export, which is true for a lot of countries, and that totally makes sense. Like, of course we import more from Guatemala. If we have like 16,000 Starbucks in this country, then what Guatemala is importing from us.
Yeah. I mean, and this is like kind of the crux of the point, is like, why are we anchoring on trade deficit to say that that is the tax that they're putting on us, and so therefore we're putting a reciprocal tax on them? It kind of just like doesn't make sense. And there's also a lot of economic reasons as to why you shouldn't anchor on the trade deficit, because it's not really reflective of them trying to like hurt us and their economic policy hurting us. It's like, it's more of just like, how much do we want to spend on the things that they're giving us?
Right. Well, isn't it also just not actually a reciprocal tariff?
Yeah,
it's not. It's not
Reciprocal. Yeah, exactly. And I think we can get into that more later. But basically he does that, and then he divides it by 2 because he says he's a nice guy. And then basically when people started looking at the sheet, first they were like, oh, you just took the trade deficit and divided by imports. And then the deputy press secretary was like, no, we didn't do that. And then started putting this super complicated equation with Greek letters on like the official Twitter account. And then someone was like, wait, one of those Greek letters is equal to 4 and one is equal to 1/4. So they cancel out. And he like specifically cropped the screenshot to like not include the part that assigned the variables to numbers, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then someone else was like, wow, they found the one Indian guy that can't do math. But basically why some people were like, this is crazy, is because like Israel is taxed more than Iran, which is like one of our biggest allies versus one of our biggest adversaries. And South Korea and Australia, where we have existing free trade agreements, also have like tariffs levied against them. And basically it's just kind of unprecedented to have some formula uniformly decide your tariffs across like tens of countries. But I guess it didn't last for long.
Yeah, because he put a 90-day pause in a couple of days. But
that was crazy too. When I saw the 90-day pause come out, and then I saw that he had posted about it on Truth Social before, I was like, oh my God, I need to like sign up for this app now.
Well, there is like
it's working.
There is a sense of market manipulation going on, because like he literally tweeted it's time to buy, and then like an hour or 2 later he tweets the pause.
Yeah.
Which is like, that has to be able to be tried in court.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it's so interesting because if the CEO of a public company was like, trust me, you want to buy,
But Elon has kind of done stuff like that in the past where he's like tweeted things and he moves the market himself.
It's a gray area for sure,
Yeah.
and people know what he's doing, but there's never been enough to like convict him on something like that. I just think it's like crazy when it's like the president of our country and arguably one of the biggest figureheads in the world.
I also
Totally.
think it'll only get crazier, right? Because like Priya said, she was like, oh, I should get this app. So it's like the next time he says something, the market's going to react even more.
Yeah. And we've seen that because like last week, the market was so volatile. Like we've never seen anything like it before. Like it going up like 10 to 12% in a day on the NASDAQ is insane.
And it dropping 15% is also crazy too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, these are like, it officially put it in a recession, like when it hit like below 20%.
Yeah, like the market had one of its worst days since like COVID or the great financial crisis.
Yeah.
And then JP Morgan came out and said that there's a 60% chance of a recession. And then I think like a few hours later, they were like, actually, we're back to baseline probability of a recession.
Yeah, we still are down on the year. Like NASDAQ is down 13% just this year. Because I was curious about that because I was like, the market did end up kind of balancing itself out just like in the last week of what happened. But on the year, we still are down a lot.
I feel like the reason why the market is so volatile is because there's a lot of debate around Trump's strategy. Like, is this all just like a play based on his book Art of the Deal, where he says like you should say you're going to do something extreme so that someone comes to the table in desperation, or is he actually planning like long-term tariffs?
Yeah, I saw this thing online because I was actually looking at that and I was wondering like, what is the uncertainty that Trump has created in the world? Because I feel like it's something where I have no idea what tomorrow is going to hold because he himself is like such a volatile person. Like he'll just like say whatever. And there actually is this like world uncertainty index that's put together by the IMF and like professors from Stanford basically, where they pull and like text mine country reports from like the economist intelligence units, I guess. And basically we're at like the peak we've been since COVID. And like COVID was the previous peak we had like ever been at. And now we're approaching those numbers, which is insane.
And that's crazy because a global pandemic that no one has any idea like what the disease is yet, when the vaccine will be out. And it's like a feat of nature. Like Trump is literally the feat of nature. Yeah.
A force to be reckoned with.
And like no one knows what he has planned because like the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, if I'm saying his name right, like said originally, like on the campaign trail when Trump said 60% tariffs against China, I remember that because like some of our guy friends that like were saying that they weren't saying they support Trump, but they were like, we kind of agree with some of his policy, and they'd always be like on the economy. And I remember because I'd always like cite this like 60% of tariffs on China, and they would always agree it wasn't a good idea, but they would be like, he would never do that. And his own Secretary of Treasury said like that's the most extreme stance he would take. And now it's like what, 145%?
Yeah.
Well, his secretary also said after this that in uncertainty, he can create leverage. So it's like they'll basically do anything that they can to make this look good, which is also shocking.
Yeah.
But the other thing his secretary said was that he hinted at delisting the Chinese stocks from the exchange, which is also another huge, like, potentially financial weapon that the U.S. could do against China. And then
Is that like Baidu?
It's
like
like
those companies?
Yeah, or like Alibaba, for example.
Yeah.
And so what you would do is you would take $1.2 trillion off of like the exchange, which is an insane amount of money.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that you do is that like it risks a crazy sell-off, and so it hurts those companies specifically, directly hurting like Chinese manufacturing as well. So I think just to hint at something like this is just a little like, it's like, I don't know, like Trump has been saying he's going to do tariffs and he did it. And so I feel like we have to like believe that these things are going to start happening.
Trump has basically raised tariffs on Chinese imports to 145%. They've raised their tariffs on us to 125%. So now there's like extreme tariffs on both sides.
Yeah. And like Xi Jinping responded to Trump being like, no one's going to win in this scenario. And he's been super open that like he'll do whatever he has to do, obviously, to like support the economy of China. But like he doesn't want this.
Yeah, and I want to note it's not like it's completely unprecedented to tariff China. I would say it's more the extent of it because like Trump initially put tariffs on China during his first term, especially on like the automotive industry. That's part of why like, as I know, Priya, we were having this conversation like a week ago, which is that like as Americans, you don't realize how advanced Chinese electrical companies are. And it's because there's like 100% tariff or something on
anything
coming out of like their EV sector. So all of that is to say, like, Biden kept those tariffs in place on a lot of Chinese sectors. Those tariffs are around like 20%. So I think it's more the magnitude, which is just like important to note, that it's not like Democrats or like the general American public wants like no tariffs on China. I think it's more like the crazy extent of it.
What's also been shown by that, though, is the economic impact those tariffs had. And so when they were announced, one, they had a 3% effect on the market. The Dow fell 3%. And then two, over time, the Trump administration realized that they had to provide aid to farmers. And so they provided $12 billion in July of 2018 and increased it to $28 billion in May of 2019. And it's estimated that this was a whole third of their income between 2019 and 2020.
To the soybean farms?
Yeah, and the soybean farms, but also because that's also because China had retaliated with tariffs on U.S. products, like 15% on fruits, 25% on pork and other products. So like it was across the board, basically. It kind of just shows like what happens when you start to manipulate the market as a government and you start to intervene with the free market, essentially. You're shifting the incentives from one party to the other, and you're directly affecting one of those parties. And in that case, this was the farmers, right? And then as a result, you have to then step in and give aid to those farmers. And so you're weirdly doing this shift that is just negative impacting overall. And it just shows that like there's a reason you have a free market. There's a reason why they show that price controls are not an effective way to incentivize. Price controls are not a way to incentivize different industries. The only time when it's worth stepping in and intervening is to protect an infant industry that makes sense protecting.
Yeah, I think it gets to the point of like, what are you trying to gain by putting a tariff in place? Because there's like three things that people usually try to get out of putting a tariff in place. And it's usually one that they're targeting. The three things are revenue. So it's like the government making money. And the second thing is restrictions. So they like actually don't want the good in the country. So I think like electric vehicles are a good example of that, because our industry is still new and blossoming. So they don't want like Chinese electrical vehicles competing with ours. And then the third is reciprocal tariffs, which is like, basically, I would say a good example of that is like what China is doing right now, because we put the tariffs first. It's what Trump says he's doing, but obviously they weren't reciprocal tariffs. But where it gets like complicated is usually you like give up making revenue off of tariffs if you're purely going for like the reciprocal aspect of it. And like you're usually not trying to go for all three of these things at once. But depending on the context in which he's talking about it, Trump will like say a different thing,
like what he's trying to do.
But then I was like listening to this Dartmouth professor who was saying that like he thinks that it actually has the most to do with restriction and Trump trying to just like protect manufacturing jobs. So he's basically trying to protect the jobs that 10% of the company have, which is like something related to manufacturing, at the expense of 100% of the country or 90% of the country that is like most affected by consumer prices.
Yeah, this is why I just don't believe that this is his goal. I feel like it's like, I don't know. I'm just like baffled where I'm like, it's so obvious.
What do you think his goal is?
I don't know. Like, this is going to be a really polarizing take. I think one, it's for optics. I think he wants to show that he's in control and that he can push and make changes, whatever those changes might be. And there's always been this like kind of back and forth between him and the Fed. So like, for example, Jerome Powell has control over the Fed, can like kind of control what's going on because we've elected him and put it in place. And Trump doesn't have that control. And Trump tries to enact control of the Fed through like different ways. And so he puts pressure. For example, he'll try to put pressure on the stock market, and then that will cause the Fed to decrease rates. So there's like things like this that he'll try to do. And that's just to create like an illusion of control over that when he never really does. There's other examples. The whole thing around the FTC, where you're supposed to like appoint a couple of chair members but keep it relatively equal. Well, there's three.
It has to be.
It has to be. Yeah. And it's like, well, there's 3 seats that are open, and he fired 2 Democratic seats. And it's like, you're not allowed to do that. That's not in law. And so I don't think it's because he's really trying to protect manufacturing jobs. I think that's a plus of like the view, like he as Trump is trying to like obviously appeal to his MAGA base, which is like the lower to middle income class workers. So this is a great story to tell. I think what he's trying to do is just stick it to China and show that he has like big balls against China and create this optical illusion that he has control, but he's not going to have control. It's going to go badly. And then two, he's also a wealthy man and he knows what he's about to do. And so his allies know to pull out and to not be in the markets when he's about to create uncertainty. And you can see that these very wealthy individuals are selling their stock at the beginning of this year. And they were betting that the market was going to go down because he kept saying, I'm going to put tariffs on. And it's not necessarily
like you gave the example of Chamath who
yeah.
like the all-in host said that they sold. Because I actually didn't know that. Like I don't remember at the beginning of this year hearing a lot of like wealthy people saying they were going to sell.
Well, it's also
people tapped in. Like, it's not just like wealthy people in general. It's like wealthy people that are tapped into like Trump's inner circle, which like they are.
Yeah, but it's like everyone, like I was actually listening to this one Dartmouth professor really known for what he says about tariffs and his interview in back like 3-4 months ago. And he basically like predicted everything that happened, but he wasn't even trying to predict what would happen. He was just like giving the most probable scenarios. And it's like exactly, maybe not the number, like the percentage is high, but everything else was how everyone kind of like, I feel like how a lot of people thought things would play out. So I don't think his like inner circle of like David Sachs or something like had information that everyone else didn't also have. I just think people don't act on that information because he's so volatile.
Yeah, I agree. But I think like if you're not a part of that inner circle, like you don't know how real the words that are coming out of his mouth are because he says like so many things that I think like you do have more information as to like if he's actually planning to act on something or not.
I don't know. Like, I'm not sure exactly where I stand on this. I can't say for sure all these people had more information than like other people did. Like he did openly say very many times, I am going to put tariffs. And like,
and he said like at minimum 10% tariffs. Like he said exactly what he did.
Yeah. And so like, yes, we should have probably all pulled out of the market in January or something like that before like there was a huge wave of uncertainty. That aside, I can't imagine that he's actually trying to protect manufacturing jobs. I do believe that he is just trying to decrease the deficit and increase more, bring in more revenue because he's like pressured to do that. And he also has to cut budget costs, for example, with Doge. And so I think he's trying to show different ways of bringing in more revenue. Yeah, I mean,
so you're basically saying like revenue.
I don't know. I'm not saying it's just revenue. I'm just saying I don't know what he's doing, but if
no one knows what he's doing.
Yeah, no one knows what he's doing. But if I'm sitting here like looking at a high school economics class worth of literature, realizing that this is not a great economic policy, I have to believe that there's something else. And I'm not saying that he's doing something good. I'm just saying that like
I think a lot of it is just like his ego though, because so many people have come out like even like Nikki Haley when she was running against him was like tariffs will be terrible. Like for everyone involved. Like she literally specifically kept pointing to how much it would impact inflation and like what that means for the middle class. And she spelled it out for them even at the time.
There's like a study that it like the 10% of tariffs plus 60% on China that he campaigned on would cost the average American household $1,700 a year, which is a lot for the average American household that's making like what, like around $100K. And then that's not even accounting for the fact that it's over double that now. So like who knows? And like some of these things have like compounding effects too, right?
Yeah.
But
and tariffs are not all bad, by the way. There's moments where we should put them on. For example, like discouraging like pollution. So if you're putting taxes on things that cause extra pollution, like EV cars versus non-EV cars and stuff like that, you're shifting the market towards a direction in something that's environmentally friendly, and you have to start to create a little bit of incentive there to like get an inertia going. I'm not saying fully fund all climate change friendly programs and saying like put a little bit money to get incentive. And so tariffs are not a bad policy. They're good to protect like struggling industries or industries that are meant for good. But in this case, at this level,
well, it's just like broad sweeping tariffs with like it's kind of like the same thing that's happening across the board in this administration, which is like they're taking actions without doing like any prerequisite work to like figuring out what they should be doing.
Which is like why people think it's from ChatGPT. And like I know earlier you talked about like the things that the US could do to China, but I also want to talk about the things China could do due to the US, because China also has a lot of leverage in this situation. And to Priya's point earlier, like Xi Jinping has made it very clear he'll like take the measures that he needs to. Obviously they can do counter tariffs, and they already have, but they also can target our businesses, which I didn't realize, but like every time we implement like tariffs against China, they basically start like making cases against US companies that operate in China. So like they'll launch an antitrust case against DuPont. They also basically will limit the ability of like different like a US aviation company to like operate within China and other things like that. So they can like similarly blacklist specific US companies.
Yeah. They also can manipulate the Chinese yuan. So
I know when you were telling me that, I was like, that's insane that they can just do whatever they want to.
Yeah. So like normally your currency is like, it's like a market, right? It's just based on like a free market of like what are the prices, who are the buyers and sellers. China, because they're communists, can just set the price of the yuan. And so in times of uncertainties like this, they start to lower the price. It's actually at the levels of 2007. And so what that means is when you're lowering the currency, like when you're devaluing your own currency, your first instinct is like, isn't that deflation? Like that's really, really bad. But how they look at it is they now get access to deals that they didn't have access to before,
like international trade deals. Yeah.
And so now the European Union is willing to work with them on the whole EV situation, because there were so many tariffs back and forth between their relationships. The money that they would get from those type of trade deals would kind of like offset the differential that they're lowering the yuan by. And so
does it do both that and make up for like the US trade like loss that they're having?
A little bit, but I don't think that's significant because the tariffs are so insane in this case. Like the little movements in the currency doesn't match to like 125%. Like it's not comparable, but they do get access to new deals. And there's literally a study that shows that as the US-China exchange rate fell, China's share of the US trade deficit rose because people are willing to enter more deals with China. And so people are not willing to buy stuff from the US anymore and buy stuff from China instead.
And that's what happens historically with tariffs too. Like during the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which has been cited a lot because it was one of the tariff acts in the US history that was seen as like leading to the Great Depression or contributing to it. But basically what I wanted to say about it is Canada started trading a bunch more with the UK because the US was being isolationist and taking themselves out of world trade. Like basically the network of international trade. And that's the same thing that's going to happen here. Like if we say we're just going to tariff everyone, and that's why the market fell so much and why Trump then said, oh, we're only going to do it to China, because when you like put yourself on a little island like that, obviously like everyone's relationships get closer. You could literally just think about it as like a friend group where like you stop going to like every event. Like obviously everyone else's like relationships are going to get closer.
If you're the asshole that's just like Venmo charging everyone, then like then I don't know why you would want to be friends with us.
Maya.
No, like
but
she clearly has someone in mind.
But you know, so it's so funny. So Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, he likes this policy. People actually think he likes this tariff policy, and like they'll commonly cite the Industrial Revolution time and like also the very historic time of like when tariffs were like good for the US. And you actually had a pretty good point about this.
Yeah, well, this was interesting because I was thinking about exactly what we're talking about and like the globalization that exists today. Like literally every single manufacturing supply chain, like it goes between all these countries. When you think about an iPhone and like what goes into building something like that, it like goes from place to place. And so I was like, maybe it's just that in our society today, like globalization has increased so much, and that's why like tariffs have such a big effect versus in the past it might have been different. And so when I looked into it at the very beginning of like when the United States was created in like the late 1700s, it was the only source of revenue for the government, which is like why we needed tariffs, because there was no income tax. Yeah, like there was no taxation at the time. And so we needed tariffs. But then like as time went on, we saw like the industrialization happen, and so they put tariffs at the time. But then you had a good point that like the tariffs aren't even the reason that like industrialization was so successful in the US, right?
Yeah, so basically during the 1880s to early 1900s, the steel industry does really well. And that's also when, like Alexander Hamilton is arguing that tariffs are essential to nurture the steel industry and protect against foreign competition like Britain. So they were basically in a competition with Britain on who can be the best steel like manufacturer or whatever. And so by 1900s, the US produces 11 million tons of steel annually, surpassing Britain. And so everyone's like, see, tariffs are a good thing. And studies now actually look back at the census data and saw that like higher tariffs were correlated with lower labor productivity and actually didn't really make
like it was just luck.
Not luck. It didn't make the steel industry better. It's the fact that the steel industry benefited from natural resources from the U.S. like Lake Superior iron ore, and so
which I feel like is luck.
Yeah, well,
like it's luck that you were at like the right place at the right time,
or you had the land to do so.
Yeah.
Like you had the natural resources to do so, and they found them, and so it actually suggests without tariffs, natural resources in a large domestic market might have driven regardless. And so we don't know for sure, but it's like it's very unclear that tariffs were a good thing back then.
Yeah. So you can't just like point to them and be like, look how successful this made the US in the past. It'll like take us back to this greatness.
Well, yeah, correlation doesn't mean causation.
And
Totally.
if anything, now we are seeing natural resources that we can't get because China was like, we're literally just not going to export our rare earth minerals to you guys.
Yeah.
And it was funny because like I remember when the market fell, you were like, we were talking about it in the car and you were like, why did like semis fall?
Yeah.
And I was like, and then like me and your mom were like, I don't know, like the whole market is just uncertain and everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
And like I knew that to be true, but I couldn't like totally place exactly what it was. And then when I was
and the reason is because like they said in the tariffs that they were excluding semis. So like that's why I was that's why I was asking, was because like they were like, we're not going to tariff semis, but then all the semiconductor stocks fell. So that's why I was like, why are they falling?
Yeah, that's what it was. And then I realized I think it's because like the rare earth minerals that are vital to semiconductors, wind turbines, and our missiles are like, China's basically just saying that they are going to put different export restrictions on it. So I think it like all just ends up in a huge like lose-lose situation. Yeah. And ever since World War II, this has been pretty agreed upon by both sides of the aisle that this level of tariffs doesn't make a lot of sense. But I feel like what Trump supporters are going to say out of all of this is just that like he wanted leverage and he wanted to bring people to the bargaining table. And for what it's worth, like to give him as much like leeway as I can, I do think in a lot of ways China is a bad actor. Like they are contributing to the fentanyl epidemic with their exports, and they know they have like stolen a bunch of our IP, which I know like Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, like there's a viral clip of him talking about that. Like they obviously like in different ways they have like done us dirty per se. And so I don't think this is like the way to go about it, but I see his point that like they like are a threat to us. I see that point. Yeah.
And I think that's probably that's maybe comes back to the earlier conversation of like maybe the tariffs isn't really about manufacturing. He's just trying to pose it as that, and he's actually just trying to fight against these other battles and become the hero in the end.
I just don't think he has the foresight.
Yeah,
to like do all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like I don't even think it's like a hot take. Like I think like he would say, and everyone else would say, like him hating China, or like, I mean, maybe not hating China, but like him seeing China as a threat is at the forefront of all of this.
Yeah.
And it's made clear even by the fact that like only tariffs only remain on China.
Yeah. The other thing is actually I wanted to dig more into like the manufacturing industry and actually what it would take for us to bring manufacturing back to the US. Because this is something that I like kept like being like, okay, like it's not going to happen through tariffs. Like Apple's literally flying their iPhones from China to India. They're not going to manufacture it in tariff. Something that I found that a lot of people don't realize is that R&D is like very separate from manufacturing, which I think is really interesting. So basically like these firms, they make these prototypes and then it's like they take it to the manufacturer and the manufacturer's like, yeah, I can't do it. And then they like go back and forth, and only 15% of the innovations transition from lab to market due to this, and 40% of the manufacturing costs arise from post-design changes and like retrofitting equipment. So there's just like a huge inefficiency loop. And the craziest thing is that they're not incentivized to fix it because the people who are profiting off of it are the engineering firms. And so like the engineering firms are like, we're making a bunch of money. We don't care. Yeah. But the way that China gets around it is that like their government promotes a high tech to traditional value chain. So they promote having like AI driven quality control systems. They promote R&D manufacturing. Like they promote each manufacturer have an R&D department in it and do R&D, in-house R&D centers. Over 75% of manufacturing firms now operate in-house R&D centers in China. So it's like they have just a completely different approach of manufacturing, and everyone agrees that that approach is universally better. But like the US hasn't created the incentives to move to this approach. And why? I have no clue.
I thought you were gonna like drop a new plan for the U.S. and you're like, I have no idea.
Thank you, Maya.
No,
Maya for
Thank you for your rant.
but it's like I think that's where you fix the problem is you do something where you like incentivize R&D centers to be inside the manufacturing facilities.
I agree, and I think overall we're just creating a more and more corrupt system, because something that I hadn't thought about that then like all made sense to me is I was listening to this podcast, and this Dartmouth professor, something Irwin, he was basically,
I get like a little more information about this Dartmouth professor every time you bring him up.
Wait, my friend actually took his class. Isn't that cool?
Annika fangirling over a Dartmouth professor.
Well, yeah. No, actually, he's
We
like,
should have him on the pod.
oh, I already thought that. I'm gonna email him. Okay. But what was I gonna say? Oh, he was basically like, now you understand why all those billionaires were sitting front and center at the inauguration, because the thing with tariffs and things like that is like major companies will strike deals with the United States government to like get around these things. And like, yeah, Apple seems super worried right now, but it kind of all makes sense that like, I don't know, it just all started clicking for me. And then I was like
they
I
all
was
know
going
what's
deep
happening.
into this like, no, like everyone knew that Trump might put insane
Yeah.
tariffs on China, right? So like Meta, Apple, whatever companies are super dependent on China, they already knew all of this, and they have the power to like be his biggest donors and sit front row at his inauguration and become best friends with him. And that's their best route to like getting around these tariffs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I know like everyone already knew that it was like in their economic benefit to be best friends with the president, but this is why like you might, in theory, you could uniquely see a tech CEO that doesn't actually support Trump be super aligned with Trump and have more of an incentive to make a big show out of it than they did with like Biden.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Going back to your manufacturing example, is that like what Tesla does and the approach they take, where they have their like R&D more or less in house, and so do they have their manufacturing?
Yeah, and it's the same approach like Anduril.
Okay.
Where like Anduril is like, we're gonna do the entire thing ourselves. We're gonna make like our R&D systems and our manufacturing facilities are gonna work in lockstep together.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way you create a closer feedback loop. Like it's the same
Which
thing.
we've
like
seen,
vertical
like they have done
integration?
it.
Yeah, it's like vertical integration. No, we have done it. And there's
Yeah.
there's companies out there that do it. Like SpaceX is the SpaceX is
Yeah,
an
it's like all
example.
Elon. It's like all Elon.
Base power, right? It's like all these companies that we're hearing about that are like sort
Next
of
gen companies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this is like this. I think this is the wave of where it's going.
I think this is a good segue into like what's going to happen to like the tech space and like the IPO space as a result of all of the tariffs that have been put in place.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like it's worth noting that you immediately see impacts in the market beyond even the market crash. So you also saw like the Nintendo Switch 2 get delayed, which apparently was a really big deal for the gaming community. But this is so funny. So basically in 2019, during Trump's earlier tariffs on China, they moved all their production to Vietnam. But then Trump announced tariffs on Vietnam. And I think he's like since reversed them. But that's like what delayed the whole thing.
Yeah, because Lululemon's made in Vietnam, and I was like, oh, this is not good.
That's where Priya draws the line. But then on top of that, like Klarna and StubHub paused their like road shows because they were planning on IPOing soon. And the reasons why they paused them were basically like uncertainty around like investors being distracted, their valuations being more volatile, and there are like some
Just a spade is a spade.
Yeah.
Call
There-
a spade a spade.
Yeah, like there's some industry risk of like Klarna being like, oh, I don't know what will happen to consumer spend, but most of it is not industry specific. It's just like the market is too unpredictable.
Well, it's like
but
bankers.
Klarna specifically, I think, is industry specific because like they over index on like the fashion industry, which will definitely get hurt by all of these tariffs because like they're coming from, like you said, Vietnam, China.
Yeah.
And if Trump decides to do this, they can't risk that IPO. But I do agree with you generally.
Okay,
Most
well, I
certainly.
just feel like you can connect like almost, I agree, like I don't disagree with you, but I don't think like you can connect almost any tech company or almost any company unless it's like pure play software back to like these tariffs pretty easily, right?
But that's the thing is like that is the thing is like
Not
when you
like StubHub, really.
But I feel like if it can't, like what they do, like reselling tickets, like aren't people going to buy less tickets to events if the economy's in like free fall?
Yeah.
exactly, which is why they don't want to IPO. right?
Well, I think the bigger reason that people don't want to IPO is because like investors and bankers, from what I saw, are not willing to take on the risk of an IPO. And if they are willing to take on the risk of an IPO, it's going to be at a significant discount that like Klarna or StubHub don't want to take, because they're like, why would we IPO at this like discounted valuation that you're giving us due to like market volatility? We might as well just wait a little bit longer and then do it. So I think like obviously tariffs and like the market and all of that like plays a role in it, but I think it's really just like the bankers and investors who have to help these companies go IPO being like, we're not willing to take this risk right now.
Yeah, and the companies don't want to be at a discount.
Yeah,
like
totally.
you said. But it's like the same thing that happened in COVID, where like Stripe was supposed to IPO, then they just were like, yeah, JK, we're not going to do this.
Yeah, and they still haven't.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, like CoreWeave and Newsmax, which were the recent IPOs, have dropped like double digits.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's the other
It's
thing, is
tough.
that like if you were to IPO in a super volatile market, like that's super likely to happen. So it's tough.
Yeah, but I think that wraps up tariffs. I'm sure this will be an ongoing conversation, and it'll be interesting to see if all the Trump supporters saying that this was some big negotiating tactic to get a huge concession from China, if that plays out and if we get any concessions at all.
Cool. So moving on, next we're going to be talking about Model Context Protocol. This is a protocol that Anthropic has dropped back in November of 2024 and has recently been all the rage in the AI space.
It really has.
Oh my God. We need like a...
You just tighten it all the way around.
I know. It's just like not tight. It's fine. It's fine. Our studio breaks every 2 seconds because we have to be a traveling studio.
We're a traveling podcast.
I don't want to talk about this. Let's just go back to MCP. Which I also don't want to talk about, by the way. Just kidding.
So MCP basically gives LLMs access to different applications and specifically like the data that they have. It opens up being able to have agents have a standardized way to perform actions, which wasn't something that you were able to like connect before.
The most simplest way I can think of this is that it's creating a single language so that applications and LLMs and data can all speak together. This is actually an incredibly annoying thing in software engineering, where you have to like figure out how to put two things together. It's like Legos, fitting Legos together. Well, all Legos have like little pegs, and so it's like kind of a universal connector. And this happens with systems and engineering in
Maya
general.
to give examples for non-technical people, and now she's talking about Legos, bro.
Hey, I'm trying to like keep it non-technical. But I was listening to this thing that explained it really well, which I want to repeat, is when LLMs first came out, all they really did was they were standalone LLM, where you could ask a question and they would give an answer, but that answer would be outdated because it's not connected to the internet, and it would just be generative text. So it's like,
and it's not like related to you, like it doesn't have memory.
It doesn't have memory. And so then to make LLMs stronger, they started hooking them up with databases, they started hooking them up with tools, but that created like what they call an MXN problem, where there's like AI applications meet N tools, and so you have all of these different connectors that you have to worry about, and it just becomes exponentially hard. And so when you have to do this tool, that tool, you have to make these trade-offs of like, is this tool really worth integrating? And you result in a like worse experience. You result in like slower dev times, slower iteration, because you have to sit there and hook every tool up to your LLM.
Yeah.
And most people saw this coming in general, where they were like, well, we just need a standard protocol on how to interact with each other.
So is Perplexity kind of like seeing an arbitrage opportunity then between like ChatGPT and being, or like a model and being connected to Google?
I don't think it really gives actually any person any extra advantage, if that makes sense. So
No, I'm not saying this gives them an extra advantage, but like Perplexity is basically like taking a model and like hooking it up to a tool, right? Like the tool being Google.
Google, yeah.
So it's like they were basically like
doing that themselves. Well, they still
as like their product.
Yeah, so they still have to do it. So basically, if you're the tool, let's say you're the Google search tool, right? You now create an MCP server on top of yourself, where essentially what you're doing is you're creating a language translator for everyone else to use you. MCP server cares about two things. It cares about resources and tools. So resources you can think of as like data. So like, what data do I have access to? So you can think about, hey, when you ask me for my resources, because you're an app and I'm a tool, right? You just ask, what data do I have access to? So I'll give that back to you. And then you can also ask me, what tools can you do? So I'll describe those tools. So I'll give like natural language prompts of, this is how you use me. And then I like do the action when you use me. So,
and this is all like behind the scenes. So from our perspective, like when we would be using these types of tools, basically all you have to do is just like type something in natural language, like, can you tell me the ARR of this company? And it's like, oh, that's probably in our CRM. Let me go to Salesforce and pull that information for you from there. So like all of what Maya is describing happens like behind the scenes in these tools, like getting information from each other.
Yeah. So let's say I'm Salesforce. I'm a tool that I want to be hooked up to an LLM. And so I'll put a Salesforce MCP server. And so I'll tell that MCP server, the resources you have access to are all these contacts, like Maya, Priya, Annika. You can send emails. The tools that you have are all of these marketing campaigns. So here's like email blast 1, here's email blast 2, and these are all tools you can use. Now an LLM on top can be like, hey, what are the contacts you have in Salesforce? Can you go send an email campaign? And now it just lists the tools and it lists the resources, and with reasoning it puts it all together. And so it becomes this really easy way to interact with basically any tool on the back end. And so the reason why this is like super important is that this is the only way we scale the AI environment.
Yeah,
because
it's key that like we've been able to do this in the past as well. And this is literally just like a new standardized way of doing it that reduces dev time significantly. So to Maya's point, we can actually scale this now.
Because before it was like whenever a tool like changed or updated, you'd have to like fix it, right? Or like redo it.
Yeah.
And now it would be automatic.
Yeah. And it's like you always have to maintain what are like all my custom connections to this one tool. And so like you said, the version bumps are automatic. And this actually came out in November, and a big question I asked myself is like, hey, like why did this become so popular? But basically AWS, GitHub, OpenAI, these are all, obviously big players in their own space. They all embraced MCP. They put up MCP servers. They put up MCP clients.
Wait, my entire LinkedIn right now is literally just like new companies announcing their MCP servers. Like that's genuinely my entire LinkedIn.
Yeah. And so I think specifically OpenAI embracing this kind of just puts it as a stamp of like, yes, this is the protocol.
We love to see two rivals coming together.
Yeah. And this is really normal actually in the dev space. Like there's other protocols, for example, OpenAPI, language server protocol. Like these are all different things. Like it's all just normal things to be able to get applications to integrate with each other. And so MCPs actually kind of make AI a little bit more of a even playing field for people who are trying to make startups, because like before, if a new like LLM was released or a new tool was released, you would like scramble to add it. So for example, Perplexity Cursor would like scramble to add the new models, right? And
well, wouldn't they even like know beforehand so that they had the time to like integrate the models?
Exactly.
In Cursor's
example. Exactly. And so that integration, right, is like it takes time. And so like having that extra time beforehand to know about it, having also the funding to fund engineers to do it, right?
You just need like manpower.
Yeah, you do. And so when you create a protocol, you make it really easy for anyone to do anything. And you also make it really easy for your own tool to get used. Yeah. So, if I'm GitHub or if I'm some browser, I'm going to put an MCP server up for myself so that people can use me.
And I saw that Google had I think it was like their cloud conference or some conference a few days ago, and they announced an agent-to-agent protocol called A2A. And so it seems like this is something that they're trying to build upon, and that's basically for two agents to talk to each other, and like the protocol for different agents to know what other agents are doing. So you can basically create like a workforce of agents that all understand each other.
Oh, and then the agents don't have to be from the same agent space. Like,
like it can just be
so then you just have like a team of people. So you can have like an outbound salesperson from like 11 Labs or whatever, and then have like a
you're right.
Salesperson from like Artisan.
Exactly. No, it's
Ava,
exactly that.
Ava.
Yeah, she's hot.
Yeah, we see her plastered all over the city. Yeah, but it is really cool, because if agents,
where will we be?
No, not in the equation.
Yeah.
Cool. Moving on to our last company, which is also our segment of the podcast of companies that would get our check for this week. We're switching it up. We're being positive.
Normally we flame a company on here, but like it's never a hot take.
This is going to be better. We're going to do a bit of a deeper dive, and we actually really like this company. It's called Base Power. Base Power installs large home batteries and provides monthly energy service and installation without requiring solar panels. They just raised a $200 million Series B from A16Z, which is a huge round. Their team includes people from SpaceX, Anduril, Blackstone, Apple, some of our friends as well.
Yeah.
Not my friends.
I met me and Priya.
I was like, you were looking at me, and I was like, I don't have friends, dude.
You have us.
No, I
You
have friends.
us.
I have friends. Epcot. Let's talk about.
ERCOT. Epcot's in Florida, but close. We're talking about Texas here. But yeah, something to note is that Base Power only operates in Texas today. And the reason that they chose Texas to operate in is because Texas has its own energy grid. So unlike the rest of the United States of America, that's either on the eastern or western, what they call interconnection grids, and that's how you get your electricity. Texas.
Don't forget Alaska.
And Alaska.
Which, like, it
Texas-
makes sense. Alaska's its own grid. That's already good.
I mean, yeah. Thank you, Maya. It's an island.
The TLDR is Texas has its own power grid, but the West and East Coast have like their own power grid that's connected between like all the states.
Yeah, and Texas's power grid is deregulated, and so basically the grid behaves similarly to like the New York Stock Exchange, but for electricity. And so there's
Run by ERCOT.
And so there's like a day ahead market, and then there's like the price of electricity in the moment, and it's pretty volatile. Prices can change a lot within the same day.
Yeah. And the reason that Texas has particularly struggled with this issue is because over time, there's been more and more weather related outages. And in those scenarios where there's outages, they can't just pull electricity from other states. So like on the Western interconnect, you can just like, if California needs more electricity, you can just go to one of the surrounding states and pull from their electricity source. But in Texas's case, you can't do that. And so back in 2021, there was
Texas.
like, poor Texas. There was like a cold freeze. I didn't even know it got that cold in Texas. But anyway, it was like freezing.
Yeah, they got snow for the first time in a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Maybe since 2021, honestly. But it led to 4.6 million Texans not having power for days, which actually like resulted in like 200 deaths and $20 billion in damages. So it was pretty significant that this happened.
Yeah, and the amount of outages is only increasing, and it's due to a lot of factors. One of it is like the changing sources of energy. So we're retiring coal plants, which means we have less energy from that, and we're increasing solar and wind, and those sources of energy are less reliable. And if you're like, okay, then why are we doing that? It's because we like need to, because of climate change. So,
like we really need to.
Yeah, we like really need to. And then on top of that, people are starting to use more energy to like charge their cars and stuff, and they'll do that like overnight to charge their EV cars versus like when you fill up gas during the day. It's less of a strain on like the electrical grid. Mm-hmm. But outages have basically like 6x over the last decade, which is crazy.
Yeah. Should we dive deeper into their business model?
Before we get into their business model, the last thing I want to say is what we've seen is that while the cost of generating power has dropped about 33% over time, the cost to deliver power has risen 65%. So you haven't seen any net change in the price of electricity for the consumer. And Base is basically working to change that and reduce the cost.
Yeah.
So now we can get into the business model.
So right now they're selling at-home battery packs, which basically can go into like all of these different homes, and it creates like a virtual power plant as opposed to a battery farm, which was like what people used to do. But this actually isn't how the company started. When they originally started, they were trying to repurpose existing power plants, but they like quickly pivoted because I guess they realized that wasn't it.
Yeah, basically the way the battery farms work is that batteries are super expensive. So there would be entities that would like buy a bunch of batteries, and then they would basically charge those batteries on the electrical grid. And then they're just doing like arbitrage on like the price of electricity. They would charge the batteries when prices were low and then sell the energy back to the energy market when prices were high, and they'd make money that way.
Which is what energy trading is.
Yeah, which is what energy trading is. And Base is taking a similar approach, but they're actually putting the batteries in homes, but they still own the batteries. So when they charge you, they're basically charging you for your access to that electricity, like as a backup.
Yeah. So they charge you like a base amount to just like install the battery in your home. And then on top of that, they charge you an annual subscription fee and like a certain amount that you're getting like per kilowatt hour, like whatever the measure of like energy is. And so that's how they're making their money off of the consumer. But then from their perspective, they're not only making that money, but they're making money from selling energy back to the Texas grid now.
So the reason why these consumers are willing to like sign up for this is because they don't want to be affected by these outages, and then they don't also have to pay a high battery cost that like they used to with like, or like for other solutions that like Tesla.
Yeah, like for example with Tesla, they're paying like $15,000 and base power is more around like $2,000. So it is affordable, and they're paying, so they also pay base power for electricity, but base power basically matches whatever electricity price they had before or gives them an even better price.
Yeah.
So to your point, like they're not like totally undercutting the utility companies, but they are a tiny bit. And the reason why they can be competitive with the utility companies is because they have so much information on energy prices.
Yeah. And the other thing is the reason why they can be competitive with solar companies who also offer in-house solar systems is that the solar system is also pretty expensive, and the technology of harnessing solar power and saving it to the battery is pretty inefficient, and so you can't actually like charge your own home power that often.
Yeah.
And so like that
Solar's actually like not good.
It's not that great, and that will run out from outages versus like base power won't. So I could totally see people having like both systems, if anything. So that's how like they're differentiating themselves from other competitors. But
Yeah.
And the reason why battery farms can't fully solve the problem on their own is because they take like over 5 years to permit and build, because you're not just like putting it in someone's house, and you also can only have them in one location versus base power is creating like a more distributed grid.
And why does this distributed grid help it?
It helps because like you are getting information. So like think of a battery farm as like in a specific area, right? Versus base power is creating these batteries all across the state over time, which means their sensors in these batteries, which they have like a ton of sensors in these batteries, are getting information on the prices and the weather and all these things in different, and the usage of electricity in all these different areas. And outages aren't statewide, so it's literally just the benefits of like diversification.
Okay, that makes sense.
And there's a ton of like market benefits too, because there's a ton of energy traders in Texas, and they're able to trade like across more markets, I believe, versus like a battery farm, because like a battery farm can only charge their batteries based on if the price is low in their area.
Oh, because it's all over Texas and different areas have different pricing.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the other thing that I think that hinges on this being attractive to the consumer, or base power actually not even attractive to the consumer, but base power being able to do this, is the fact that the battery prices are getting lower.
Yeah, I was looking into this because Base Power is a pretty new company. Like they started in 2023, and I was like, why has no one done this? I guess like when I was looking into it, I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. Not one I would have thought of, but it's a good idea. And basically, like because of the EV boom, we've been forced to figure out the supply chain for lithium ion batteries, because you need them in every single EV. And so when all of that happened, lithium ion batteries, the price of them decreased. They've decreased like 82% in the last decade. And this is like what's made batteries affordable, because before this, they were just like an inaccessible.
Yeah. And that's why instead of battery farms, you can now have like this D2C battery thing.
Yeah. So also the market conditions created a perfect environment for base power to like get product market fit and actually even compete in this area.
Yeah. And it's like that also in combination of, in general, our usage of electricity is just going up across the board. Like by 2050, people are saying it might even like triple from where we are today in the United States. And I think especially with like AI and data centers and EVs, like all of these things, it's just really straining the grid right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's reasons why we want, like to your point, why we want electricity usage to go up.
Yeah.
In the case of EVs, because that means naturally I would think our fossil fuel usage would go down.
Yeah.
But it's like,
is it?
Is it? Because like in the AI world, I guess, I don't know. But can our grid support it?
Right now, like it's supporting it, but I feel like in the future, it's definitely going to be tough. There was this study where Goldman basically estimated that by 2050, we would need an additional $2.3 trillion dedicated to expanding, upgrading, and digitizing power networks. And this was only like part of the broader $6 trillion plan that they put into place, but specifically for the grid. And this was in 2023, which was like before AI even blew up.
Yeah, and it might sound dumb, but I was like, what exactly is the grid? And it's basically just like you have like solar plants or like coal plants, and then those actual voltages go through like high transmission voltage lines and low transmission voltage lines, as well as there's like areas where you can transfer from like high to low voltage, and then it all connects to like your circuit in your house. But there's literally millions of miles of the low voltage power lines. Obviously we see them every day, but like I don't think about that and like see them and think that's like the grid, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how we think of these things for free.
Oh, like you think they're free?
They're not free. We pay for
free,
it.
yeah.
No. Not that I think they're free. It's like this infrastructure that was built before we were even born.
Oh yeah, it's like hasn't been updated properly in decades.
Well, that's like part of the issue is that because it was built in like the 70s and like before, basically like PG&E is literally responsible for the largest wildfire in California because of their old technology and infrastructure.
Yeah, and so basically like Base Power's long-term plan is to become a retail electric provider, which would compete with utilities. But instead of starting by like doing what Priya said in the beginning of like generating power, instead they are generating demand for power, if that makes sense, by like having these batteries. So they like control the demand side and they can like work their way up to competing with utilities in other markets. But the reason why I'm saying this is because
you're saying supplying demand, not necessarily generating demand.
Sorry, not generating demand, but controlling demand. Like
they're meeting the demand at a lower price and at a place that wasn't accessible before. Like they're meeting the demand when it couldn't be met.
They're owning the demand. Yeah. Like they're basically trying to own the demand side instead of owning the generation side.
Yeah. Which most companies in the past have always gone for generation, like Tesla.
Which is difficult because then you are competing with like major utilities.
Yeah.
Versus like they can work with utilities in the short term. But the point that I was trying to make is that like I was reading this thing about some of their product features and it's literally like, oh, you could pay for your electricity with Apple Pay, or there's like games within the app so that you can like reduce how much energy you're using, or like just overall there's like a better product. But no one's ever tried to bring like next gen technology features to like a PG&E.
Yeah, well, because PG&E also has no incentive to, because they're like, it's a monopoly. Like it literally is a monopoly.
Yeah. And so while they're starting in Texas, there is room for them to expand into other markets. But the way that they go about that is they're just going to work with those utilities in the beginning, because those utilities in certain situations need the power that
like they just need
Base
help.
Power has. Yeah, they need help. And so like they'll work with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you see that as like what they're going to do with this $200 million is go to other states and like work with these utility companies?
Yeah, I think they're also building out their battery like manufacturing facility.
Oh, so that they can produce more.
Yeah, and like it's really technically difficult to do all of this. Like to create a battery, like no one has created a battery that holds enough power to like power a house for an entire day the way that theirs does, because they haven't been created for the consumer like case.
Also because it's never been cheap enough to do that.
Yeah, but also we were talking about verticalization before, where it's like I would assume a player like this would be just like the energy trader and maybe just like the salesperson for the battery maker, and they would be completely separate people. But it almost seems like Base Power can take advantages of also being the battery player and develop batteries specifically for consumers.
Yeah, and they are. And like even I watched an interview with one of the founders and they talk about how they're optimizing the entire process of like installing a battery. And they were like, they're literally trying to shave like minutes off of the process because it's like part of their competitive advantage. Like I obviously don't understand all the technical specifications of it, but they're just like optimizing every part of that chain.
Well, that makes sense, because if you're competing with PG&E, which is like generally regarded as like pretty cheap and like margin low because of, I think, government subsidies, right?
I don't know why. It is something like that.
It's something
I think
like that.
The state of California like gives them money.
Yeah.
For sure.
It is hard to be a profitable company in this space. So I can see how like the margins really matter.
Yeah, and there's a whole interesting conversation around like what are the biggest risks. And the thing that I thought would be the biggest risk is like, okay, they're trying to fix the transmission problem, right? Like it's super volatile when people use electricity, and they're trying to like even out. If you think about it as like up and down, they're trying to like even it out. And it's like, okay, so if you even it out but you're making money on the spread, then like haven't you just gotten rid of your own business model? But basically it's like if they're able to fix that problem, by that point they'll probably be so big
Yeah,
that it'll
because
be
they
like
would have
hard.
so many.
They'll basically
Yeah.
like be a utility. They'll just
Yeah,
be like
yeah.
a next generation utility.
That makes sense.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think they will do really well.
Yeah, I think it does hinge on their expansion strategy though. Like I think it's clear that they will do really well in Texas, but I'm curious to see like when they do expand, what approach they take.
Yeah, I saw this thing that like in one summer day in Texas, the price of like megawatts per hour can go from $0 to $5,000.
What? That's
Like that's the
crazy.
spread.
That's
Wow.
insane.
And so I don't know what the spread would be in other regions of the country, but
Yeah.
it is like just a margin thing at
No,
that point, right?
no, like in California, it's definitely not that much. Obviously, it's expensive, but electricity bills never go over like a few $100s.
Would X amount per like square feet. It's like hard. Like
Yeah, but it's like you could power like a pretty decently sized home in the summer in California for like under $1,000.
yeah.
And it's like there's so many considerations. Like even within Texas, the founder was saying that depending on the city, there's an entirely different process to like get approval to be a provider of energy.
Yeah.
The way that they are, even though they're not a utility, like even what they're doing, like there's a ton of like regulatory things you have to go through. And they were saying that they're even like having a difficulty with HOAs. I don't even know why, but it's like they're just going to run into so many of these issues. But I feel like they have a lot of capital and they have like really smart people working there.
Yeah.
So I think they have a good shot.
Well, the only way that this works is like with capital in that way, because it seems like they'll not focus on profitability for a while
Yeah.
because it is such an infrastructure heavy kind of company.
It's so rare to see a company where their like incentives are like all the incentives are aligned well.
Yeah, and they're doing good. They're saving lives.
Yeah. That's true.
Well, I guess like if an outage were to happen.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Well, they are saving lives in general because they're making it easier to transition to clean energy as well. So like
Yeah.
even without an outage.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Cool. This has been a fun episode.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah?
Base Power will give you our check if you want us to angel in your next round.
We should do this more often.
Do what? The
And on a positive note.
The podcast.
Wait, it's kind of fun recording
She's
today because we haven't recorded in
And so long.
long.
Yeah, I was like,
And
oh,
we're
I
not
missed-
burnt out.
No, I feel like burnt out, but it's not like
Maya, let's just wrap the episode up.
but not by this podcast.
By life.
By work.
Maya!
Well, Maya has to catch a flight to Japan, so she
I
needs
love
to
my
dash.
job.
Okay,
Oh
bye.
my god. Bye.
Bye.